just to say before I read this, that Mike wrote this, not me, because it sounds very sarcastic if it's coming from me. Right. Mike Bithell got very lucky with a pretentious game about rectangles called Thomas Was Alone. Since then, he's built a team of world-class developers, artists, and creators. He currently focuses on direction and writing. He is frankly lucky to be here. Over to you, Mike.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Hopefully the audio's coming through.
Yeah.
So I'm hosting or chairing the writing panel, which I'm massively ill-equipped for, and I'm fortunately surrounded by much better writers. Let's get all of you on here with your videos and your mics and all these kind of things. There we go. Teams coming together. Feels like a heist movie.
You need to all just slide into place.
It is. It's good. It's good. So what I wanted to start with, actually, I wanted to let everyone kind of introduce themselves. That's often more interesting and scary for everyone, and gives me less work to do, which I'm always keen on. So let's work our way around the table and see. So what do you do? What's your job within games? And what kinds of things have you worked on, and how have you worked on them? Let's start with the first person on my screen, is Andy. Andy, tell us a bit about yourself, sir.
Oh, rats. I thought I was going to go last. Yeah, my name's Andrew Walsh. I'm a writer-director. I've worked across theatre, TV, film, animation, comics, most things, and also video games. So I've worked on more than 85 different titles so far, in roles from can you fill in these barks through to a narrative consultant, through to performance direction, and narrative direction, which is sort of includes all of the things below. So amongst that time, I've worked on everything from little mobile phone games about sheep through to AAA titles, and again, everything there from narrative direction on things like Prince of Persia through to writing rather a lot of gruff soldier lines for the Division 2, and currently working, finishing off some bits and pieces on a couple of projects that I can't talk about. So yeah, general thing about the industry, can't tell you. Yeah, pass over to you.
Awesome. I have to remember to unmute myself. Dave, tell us a bit about yourself.
Hi, yeah, I'm Dave Gilbert. I run a little indie company called Wadget Eye Games. We've been in business since 2006. We focus on point and click adventure type stuff. We've done about 15 or 16 games. A lot of them I write myself. I also publish other developers. So we work with a lot of voice actors, and we're known for Blackwell, Shiva, Resonance, Primordia, recently Unavowed and Techno Babylon. Currently, we're working on a game called Nighthawks by Richard Cobbett, and also a game called Old Skies, which is kind of my own personal thing, which I haven't really officially announced yet. I guess this is kind of my first time doing that. So yeah, that's basically what I do.
Awesome. I got a little comment saying that my audio's a bit quiet. Let's use this one as a test. Am I a little bit louder now, a little more comfortable for everyone?
Yeah, sound good.
Awesome. And Sally, sorry, apologies to interrupt there. Sally, tell us a bit about
No
yourself.
problem at all. I'd like to delay this moment as long as possible. I totally
It's
share
the worst bit, right? The worst bit.
Well, you know, I'm completely having the imposter syndrome moment that you are, because if you're feeling like an imposter, what am I doing? And yeah, super honoured to be on a panel with writers that I really admire. So I'm probably better known for my voice acting work. I specialise in video games, mostly adventure games. Yes, and I'm known for kind of doing a lot of outreach to kind of help people understand what voice acting is like, how to relate to us better, how to get the best out of us, that sort of thing. I'm also a writer for video games. I've been a playwright for a very long time and didn't think transferable, and then went to a lot of panels like this, and saw Andy speak and realised I had a bunch of transferable skills and I should probably give it a go. So I specialise, unsurprisingly, on adapting dialogue to make it more suitable for voice acting.
Nice. And we're actually, that's something we're going to kind of get to later on in this. Our job here is, as Ed laid out, to kind of lay a bit of a foundation for all the other panels. I think we've probably got the job where I feel like the audience watching may know the most about our aspect of it, because it's writing, and a lot of people watching this will be writers. But I still want us to kind of go in and kind of take a very kind of beginner's approach to this and kind of try and demystify what this whole process is.
I
and
still
kind of,
feel like a beginner, so that's okay.
yeah, no, I think if there's one theme that's already coming through is that we all think we're imposters who've snuck in somehow. I feel like that's just a general rule in the games industry.
I don't want anyone to find that out yet.
Yeah, exactly. This is how we get caught. This is all one massive trap that Samantha's laid out for us to reveal ourselves as the fools that we are. I think the first kind of question I had, the first thing I wanted to kind of start with was, what exactly is games writing as a concept? Just very generally, it's a very big question. We're going to go into a lot of the details later, but I'm just interested in demystifying what we do as game writers. What's our day filled with? What's the process? When do we come in? I know these are very big questions, but I'm interested in kind of just picking out a few things just to kind of try and ground this a little bit in terms of what is a games writer. Dave, do you have an answer to that?
Yeah, it's something that I reevaluate my thoughts on that like every year. So you ask me again in a year, I'll have a completely different answer. But currently, my definition of that is kind of being specifically a narrative games designer or writer, is you want to merge the narrative and gameplay. So you have the two things they need to kind of mesh together. And I kind of see of it as like a high level and low level. You have like the high level of what you're trying to get across. What are these characters like? And then the low level is like, what kind of game mechanics reinforce what these characters are like. Like, just to use an example, in my last game, Unavowed, there's a character named Mandana who's her character is that she has lived for several hundred years in New York City, knows all the secret places. Her mechanics is that she's very agile and can climb and get into places that you wouldn't normally be able to go. So she's literally physically able to find the secret things in gameplay. So they kind of reinforce each other. So that's kind of my kind of pretentious definition of what that is.
I dig that. Does anyone have anything they want to kind of add to that, or anything a different answer to the question of what a game writer is?
I think it's a hugely wide question because games are huge. It's such a wide medium. It covers everything from interactive fiction and click play, where you are looking at forms which are very familiar in terms of prose, and you're looking at a different way of delivering the pacing, through to tonal pieces like Journey, through to huge 100 or more hour play multiplayer games. So there is no one fixed answer, and the things that you can be asked to do as a writer vary hugely, from coming in right at the end to fix a script that somebody's already written. Please don't do that to people. Yes, it's a way. Yes, get somebody involved at some stage, but get them involved earlier, through to coming up with the concepts at the start. So if one of the most challenging things is the rules, if there are any, of writing that are laid out, and formats that are laid out for television and film. Some of those are transferable, some of them not. But if you learn to write for television for half hour, there is a big jump that most writers recognize between half hour and 60 minutes, and a bigger jump to screenplay, because understanding how the pacing works if you're going either way is incredibly challenging. And that's recognized within TV writing and screenwriting. In games, it's hardly talked about, the fact that one day you're going to be writing a mobile phone game with 30 lines of text, through to the next point you're going to be working with a hugely diverse range of characters in a 100-hour multiplayer game. So we are still finding the rules. We are still defining the rules. You can drop in, as David is, where you've got design control, or you can drop in where you've got no control. So a very diverse range of writing tasks in an industry where we are still establishing the forms and formats of writing, and they are evolving every year. So when people talk about screenplays being tricky for 90 minutes, yeah, welcome to interactivity. Take that and times it by 100.
Yep.
I feel like, Sally, you're in a very particular perspective right now, having recently done that transfer or being in the midst of jumping across. Are there any other kind of insights or things that you've spotted in the kind of transition from more traditional playwright work to games work?
Yeah, definitely. So I started playwriting during the time when sort of playwright was king, and that when you put down your play, it was everybody's job to serve that vision. And now we're more in a playwriting world where director is key, and you're kind of oh, you did some words, great, bye, which prepared me beautifully for some games projects. I'm not being rude, that's just how it is, and you have to have a thick skin. I think a lot of what we do as writers, under that incredibly broad umbrella of writers, is that we're invisibly underpinning the game. We're the people who make it a cohesive whole in a very kind of piecemeal industry that's constantly working apart, and partly down to incredibly strong NDAs, we can't really talk to each other. So it's really useful to have one person or one team of people who are the writers who understand what they want this game to be and what they want the player to experience, and that's our job. And whether that's we're narrative designers and we're creating the concept and the plot points and the characters, or if you're a dialogue doctor coming back and going, all these characters sound like the same person, does that serve the central premise of the game? And then fixing that. So yeah, a lot of what we do is invisible, and I think if you're playing a game and you go, crikey, the writing's really strong in this bit, that's maybe not great writing.
Calling attention to itself in that way. What I love, by the way, is hosting a panel of writers. What you get is an excellent adherence to foreshadowing and just structure in general. And the speakers have the list of questions, and what Sally's done there is expertly given me the segue I need into the next point, which is a discussion of what are the kind of the jobs involved in writing. What are the roles that I know in some of our cases, in mine and Dave's case, for example, we're kind of in kind of the indie side of things. I'm actually interested to jump, and then I think probably do a lot of the kind of wearing multiple hats stuff. I assume we've got that in common. I actually kind of want to come back to that, but I think jumping to Andy, who I know has done a fair amount of kind of AAA work, I'm kind of interested in what the jobs are. Sally touched there on narrative designer, with dialogue doctors, writers in a more general sense. I feel like we throw these words around a lot, but a really kind of succinct kind of explanation of each of those jobs would be, I think, super useful context.
It would be a super useful context for the industry too, because there is no such definition that is accepted by everybody on any of these things. So I'll do my best. I think essentially it depends where the team bring you in on the process. So the industry has got a lot better at understanding that if you're going to put a story in, you know, the big thing is, do you need a story in a game? Let's deal with that one. No, you don't. But if you put a story in a game, try and make it good. And that would generally involve, like, if you're going to put audio in, speak to people who know about audio. If you're going to get music in a game, speak to people who know about music. If you're going to put story in, you know, speak to people that have an interest and joy in narrative. You can be brought in on that premise even now in the development cycle at the last end, which is, we wrote all this stuff, can you make it vaguely sound okay? Or we got this out to beta and people went, doesn't sound very good and I don't know what the characters are doing. Can you come in and stick plasters over it and try and weld these bits together to make a story? Not the way to do it. I mean, obviously better to do it at that stage than not at all, but not the way to do it. Through to the first end, where you could be coming in to come up with concepts which are then taken on to develop elsewhere. I think the other definitions come in how you interact with the rest of the team. So narrative design is quite a fluid term. My definition would be how story and the game design intersect to make one unified experience. I think that's the art of narrative design. The craft of narrative design is the technical side, which is the actual putting in of lines. So quite often when you get narrative design jobs out there, they're asking for a technician to come in and implement the lines and put them into the level, which is an incredibly important set of tasks and skills. Nothing to dismiss anybody that's doing that technical side. You can have a great script, and if it's badly implemented, forget it. So There's the technical side of it, and there's the art side to what narrative design is. So as a writer, again, you can come in looking to do character and words, theme, and all of the things which you've experienced elsewhere. But you can also come in from a technical standpoint to be thinking about how how game mechanics and narrative mechanics can work to sell the emotions of it. So looking at a game like Florence, where emotion is conveyed a lot through the game mechanics. And that's missing in many games. A lot of times the story is attached to the game mechanics, and there's not much of a crossover between them. And it's great where we're beginning to immerse those two things together. That was the shortest answer I could do. So hopefully that has covered a lot of ground.
You have. No, that's really good. I actually want to kind of expand on where you're going there, and just kind of talk a little bit about those overlaps. I think that's actually, as you highlight, that's kind of where it gets really interesting, right? Is when we work with the rest of the members of a team. I'm just interested in any kind of stories or insights you guys have on that process of being in a team, working with people who are not writers, and kind of what that can bring and what opportunities that opens up. Sally, have you got any thoughts on that?
For me, I try to establish if someone doesn't have a writing background, and often I'm brought in because they've been told to get a writer in and they don't know why, and it's a personal insult. So that there's sort of this slightly defensive relationship that I have to break down and sort of say, no, I am here to serve your vision. I'm here to boost the game up and make it more what you imagined, rather than take it away from you and make it something proper, which I think is a lot of what writers get sort of, that's what they think a writer on board means. Oh, it's getting away from me. And my job is partly to kind of reassure a developer that I understand fully what they're going for, if they have made it clear to me. Share as much information with me as possible, and then taking that and saying, here's why I did this. So I had a project where the developer clearly had a really strong affinity to a particular idiom, which was useful for identifying the character, but unfortunately every character came out with this idiom, and eventually I had to say, like, I've got rid of your idiom because for these reasons. It's not because it's bad in an objective sense of good or bad. Is it serving your vision? And I think sometimes what you do as a writer is the developer is up close to the project and sometimes panicking, and our job is to be stepped back from it, a little removed, and to say, looking at this as a player, this is the impression we're getting. Is that what you're going for, and how do we go towards what you want? So a lot of what I do starts with questions, which feels like I should be providing answers, but actually Dave's nodding because I've done this to him, where I've gone, so what happened there? So why did she do that? So why did you choose this sequence, and what is this doing here? And it feels a bit like you're a bug on a pin. But actually, sometimes it's really useful to say, did I choose that? Or was that something I put as a holding pattern to come back to later, and I've never come back to it, which is a valid thing that happens. But yeah, that's sometimes what happens for me.
I like that. I actually kind of want to continue that with Dave, because as we are often the pins, and in mine and Dave's case, we're obviously the kind of the game developers and game teams that are often bringing in writers. How does that collaboration work from your side, Dave, generally?
Well, it's interesting because usually it's very hard when it's your own work. I know I speak as someone who's written my own games, and I've published other developers, and often it's hard to have that distance. And when I work with another developer and I see something's working, like Sally said, sometimes you gotta, they feel like you're attacking them when you say, yeah, this doesn't really work. Let me explain why. Here's how I think it could be better. So let's try it this way. And often navigating that can be a challenge. I do know the best example of this is there's this wonderful book written by Russell T. Davis, and it was the American talking to Brits about Doctor Who. But it was this wonderful book he wrote called The Writer's Tale, where he talks about how he was trying to write David Tennant's last scene where, his doctor dies. Spoiler, that doctor dies. And he originally wrote it so he sacrifices himself for a complete stranger, which is a very David Tennant doctor way of going. But as a fan, like he always thought from the point of view of the audience. And he's like, as a fan of Doctor Who, as a fan of this doctor, I am not satisfied. And so he changed it so he sacrifices himself for someone who the audience does care for. And if you've watched that, you know how emotionally amazing it is. And so often I have to take that step back, like remove myself and try to play it through my work as a player. And I always have to think, where is my emotional engagement right now? And often like I'm adding extra puzzles just because, you know, adventure games need puzzles, but does it add anything? Does it tell me anything about the world or the character I'm playing or whatever? And if the answer is no, I'll sometimes just get rid of it altogether, which is why the common complaint about my work is that it's quite easy and the puzzles, they're not that many puzzles, because I often get rid of them. Because often I force them in because that's what these games need. And I'm like, no, they don't.
I too enjoy that criticism on a regular basis.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm sure like fans are watching this going, yeah. So often like trying to, that fight between like, you want to make a good story and you want to make a good game at the same time. Like I have an amazing idea for a scene. Then I try to make it playable and I'm like, the game is either playing itself or suddenly that amazing idea I had just is not fun or interesting, because in a game setting, it's just playing itself. And so you often have to like bash these two things together and just mesh them together and make them work. And that's often a challenge as a writer, someone who does both writing and designing. When I do both, it's hard to have that distance. When I publish others, it's a little easier because I'm not the writer and I could say, no, this does not work. Let me explain why. When I do it myself, it's 10 times harder, which is why my current project is taking so much longer than it should. But that's another story.
Yeah, too much power over something can often, it drags on. I'm actually interested.
Everything.
Of course, right? Because you've got the luxury to do so. I think that's a really interesting set of answers from kind of the designer production point of view. I'm actually interested in terms of someone like Andy. How much do you actually interact with people outside of the kind of design production pipeline? Like, so people like artists, musicians, the actors themselves. How much are you actually getting to interact in those spaces beyond kind of reporting to a designer or producer?
I think that comes down to, as everyone else has been saying, it comes down to what the relationship is when you arrive on a project and how much time you've got. I've worked on projects where I've just been sent stuff and then you've been sending emails all the time saying, is there a picture of the place where this is happening? Have we got pictures of it? Can I have anything? So the answer would be too little generally, but how I would like to work is with as much contact as is. While meetings can multiply in game development and you don't want unnecessary meetings, you do want quality contact with as many people as possible. And I started my writing in small scale theatre. So in that you're wearing many hats, you get to know everybody, you want to know, and you've got one chair and three lights. How do we make the most out of this? And I try and do the same with game development and story development when I get the chance, which is to start with the budget and to start with knowing who's doing what and to talk to each of the people involved, because that way you can tell the best story with the resources that are there. That way you can tell what interests and what passions and aims and objectives are behind everybody's decisions. That way everybody is working as a team. Which for me is a no-brainer, but is often not the case because there are power bases or people are busy or narrative just isn't seen as important still. But the ideal is to talk to as many people as possible, particularly at the right stages within the production, and to carry it from conception right through to the post-production, because again the implementation is important. Being able to talk to directors and writers is important when you can. So yeah, if anybody's involved, try and get involved and make it a team effort and a community. But most of the time you are on the outside, peering in through small windows, getting what view of it you can, and trying to explain that, knowing that the monster is 6 foot tall or 60 foot tall, knowing that the person is 10 feet away or 100 feet away, knowing that they are sprinting rather than running, makes a huge difference to how you write it, let alone everything else. So sometimes when you're in the booth going, what, how does this relate? believe you me, the writer was in the same bit, and having the conversation quite often with teams saying, generic lines don't work. Please don't make me write generic lines. Let me work with you to write specific lines which will deliver the best experience that we can. Because again, you want to reinforce the design, not force your dialogue onto the design. So the more communication, the better.
I'm actually interested, speaking there about kind of the windows and obviously the specificities of different projects and how they differ. I think we could definitely do a panel on just the variety of the scopes and structures of these projects. One thing I wanted to ask all three of you was what is an aspect of your job as a writer that nobody actually knows that you do? What's an aspect that would be surprising to someone watching this who wants to be a writer in the industry or works with writers, but they're mysterious, weird creatures in another room somewhere? What's the writing work that nobody kind of knows you actually do, and that would be interesting to the guys watching this? It's a weird question. Who's got an answer for it?
I mean, the one thing that I noticed one thing I discovered quite early when I started and I had a few games written is how easy it is to overwrite. And a lot of new game developers do this, especially new adventure game writers. They write so much and more. You learn very fast. More is not better. And I spend more time debating like how I should cut things down. I write an exchange. It takes me maybe 5 minutes to write an exchange and it's 10 lines. I'm like, could I get this down to 8? Can I get this down to 6? Do I need this line? And I spend more time thinking about how to edit and how to cut than actually writing it itself. And I found that like 90% of the job is editing.
Yes.
There's just so much there. It's not just, you don't just keep writing. You gotta craft it. And often it's like you chip away at it until you get to what you want. And that's something I was not expecting when I started. Like my early game, people say, oh, like your dialogue is so like snappy and terse now. And like, if you play my early games, they don't friggin' shut up. They just do not shut up. And I play Blackwell Legacy or Emerald City Confidential now. And I'm like, oh my God, like I would, if I edited this now, the game would be 5 minutes long. And so that's a big part of it. And that was a big surprise to me when I started out.
Sally, you were nodding along vigorously.
I'm going to nod my head off.
It's great for the voice actors. They more work for them. But
well, that's what I was going to say. That
yes.
When things are overwritten, there's no room for subtext.
Mm-hmm.
We're just saying what we're feeling and doing all at the time, and it's very boring. And we don't really add anything as voice actors. The thing that I add is my terrifying red pen. Is that I will go through and go, do you know what? What happens if we start the game like 10 minutes in? What have we lost information-wise at the beginning? Is it very little and something we can catch up with? I'm always cutting the beginnings off things, which sounds awful, but quite often as writers, you kind of, developers turned writers, you kind of write yourself into the project. And that's a really useful process, but not necessarily something the player needs to experience. It's got you there, but it doesn't necessarily add to the overall thrust and momentum of the game. So yeah, a lot of the invisible stuff is the stuff that I'm taking away, and the gaps that I'm leaving. It's not a joke. It's the comment I always make when I'm looking at a script and I can see it's quite, I won't say overwritten, but it is quite wordy, is I'll say, I'll record it for you like that. But I think I can probably do that with one word or sometimes with a breath.
Yeah.
And that's not to undermine the work of the writer at all. That's because I understand what you're trying to go for. And getting the voice actor in to bring an additional layer on top. The difference between I'm so angry with you, but this is the 4th time you've done it and I've run out of energy to shout at you, and it's huge. And the second one is good writing, and learning that taking your hands off the wheel sometimes is good writing, is a real lesson. Yeah.
There was a
No,
game.
it's a joke on my team that it's draft 4 where we always delete the scene where the protagonist describes exactly what they think about everything in their life.
I was just going to say,
it's always that 4th script where I remove the one scene where the hero says, "Okay, so let me lay out what I need from the world."
That sounds like a musical. That sounds, you know,
It's a very. I always write an "I want" song in every script, and we always end up deleting it. Yeah, for sure.
The worst offender, and like AAA games do this all the time. I was playing something last night. I won't say the name of the game, but I don't know why it makes me irrationally angry when they literally just like say what just happened on the screen. There was a scene where just a door appeared in front of the group, and then someone says, "Oh my God, a door just appeared in front of us." We're like, yeah, I just saw that. You don't have to, like, that just drives me absolutely crazy. It's so unnecessary.
I think in defense of whoever wrote that, probably what happened is they weren't told what was going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
They were told there was a good effect at a point that the GFX might have been cut, and there would have been someone at some stage in a higher up in the organisation that would not have had the trust and faith to rely on what you're saying there, Sally, which is that people can understand these things and that they can read between the lines, because a lot of the time you are told, make it explicit. And you are told that repeatedly. And so I think one of the things that is not understood, and I think this is an issue within games about any of us understanding anybody's disciplines, is that we know what we're doing. So that you are bringing a skill base there, and therefore, you know, when you're talking about,
I've never known what I'm doing.
coming in to do those things, it's, you know, you're hopefully not being hired just to glue a couple of lines from Die Hard to a plot device from Aliens to make it feel a bit like Game of Thrones, which, you know, quite regularly is the hiring conversation you have, where it's like, well, wouldn't you rather make it something about your own project? And, you know, the when somebody tells you that their favorite game is Journey, or the opening is really like something from a game where there's no explicit tutorial in there, and that the players are allowed to find their own way forward, but they won't let you do that with the story. Trying to explain regularly in meetings that the whole point of the narrative device that creates tension is that we don't know who did the murder, and that, you know, that they shouldn't find that out in the first scene, and that the player won't be confused. They will be engaged and want to know what's going on. And the same counts for all of those emotions. You know, it's much better to have those moments where the characters look at each other and you can infer a relationship, rather than to try and do vector graphic sex on screen. And I think that the sort of trying to understand that emotion can add to the journey and to make those things, and you can infer it, and that's a positive thing, is still being explored. And I don't mean that as a games bashing thing, because, you know, if you talk to game designers, they feel misunderstood. If you talk to artists, they feel misunderstood. It's a huge team effort, and trying to get all of those people to understand and value each other's disciplines in the pressure of games development is extremely hard. If it wasn't, everyone would be doing it and making a fortune out of it. So, you know, these are things that we can look at improving, and I think are improving within the industry. But with a team of 450 people based in different places, can be difficult to achieve. So, you know, we should talk about the ideal, but be aware of why the optimum approach isn't always taken.
Absolutely. The thing that struck me moving industries was having to kind of justify my existence in a way that I had never had to do before, and having to say, no, I haven't just kind of magically looked over this and these are the changes because of an opinion I have. I'm doing something here, and having to really dissect what you do for someone. It's been really interesting being brought onto projects where they know they need a writer, but they don't know what a writer does. And I sort of compare it to hiring a plumber and then standing over him and going, so why are you using that wrench? So and you know, you don't do that. You hire someone's expertise and then you trust them to do their job. And a lot of events like this shine a light on what we're doing and how important we are, that we're not just a bit of a shine at the end of a project. We're the core of the project, and that what we're doing is hugely complicated, and yeah, as Andy says, often with our eyes shut, because I mentioned NDAs earlier, non-disclosure agreement that we're often under, that we can't talk to other people about specific details about the game, sometimes everything, on pain of being dragged through the courts. And so that makes us all very cagey about what we can share, even with colleagues. And especially when you're a freelance writer brought into the project, you can't get this information, and you're sort of going, wait, when you called me in September, she had purple hair. Does she still have purple hair now? And it's this sort of grasping for information. And if someone doesn't know that as a writer, you're pulling from art, you're pulling from music, you're pulling from design, if they don't know that that's what you're doing, they're just like, just do the words. Just do the words. You don't need to know whether, I've met the monster before or what have you. I really do. That we need the context and basic. Of course, I'm going to say value writers. But I think we all have played games where we have a gut instinct that the writing is bad. But what I always say is that it's not necessarily bad. It's out of context. And it's not informed, and it's not moving towards the main vision of the game.
There's this famous.
It reminds me. Oh, sorry, go on.
There's a famous scene in the new Thief game where I haven't actually played it, but at one point, like, you're going through the sewer, and then there's a line of dialogue where he says something about a monster, like he sees a monster like down below, but there's no monster. There's no monster there at all, and there's no monster ever shows up. It's just obviously was something that was cut. They left the line in the game, and they just never removed it. Oh, no. And it's just like that lack of context. Like they didn't know. It was just there.
Like a lot of things in games, I feel like
you got to be on top of it.
Yeah, well, I think what's weird about this whole aspect of the conversation is this reminds me of being a designer 10 years ago. And the kind of the way the designers were often having to justify, no, I think that the fight between these monsters should happen here. This isn't just a gut feeling. You're paying me to design. And I remember having very similar conversations from the design side. So basically, I keep choosing the job that no one listens to, which is a really interesting psychological problem that I can invest a little work in and time on after we've done the panel. I want to just quickly say we are scoming towards the end. So anyone who's got any questions they'd like answered, please throw them into the chat so that they're there for us when we get there. I've got one more kind of scripted question I want to ask, which is about casting, which is about kind of how involved are any of you in the casting process, and how does that impact the work as a writer? For me, the example would be that I generally do a pass on all my scripts after I've cast. So I'll specifically alter a script to match the skills and talents of the actors that I've managed to convince to work with me. I don't get the impression that's very kind of necessarily very common in the process. I'm interested in whether any of you have been involved in casting or what you've done, basically. Big question.
I could definitely answer this. I am involved in the casting and directing of every game I've ever done or published, and some other games that other developers have done. So I guess at a rough count, I've done about like 18 games worth of voiceover in the last 15 years. I'm not a professional, but I've done it enough times that I know a few things. I'll be on the workshop later, so we could talk more about that then. But yeah, I'm very involved, and like you said, it knowing who is going to play your characters makes a huge difference. I had a series called Blackwell, which was 5 games, and like by the last game, I knew who was going to play the 2 primary characters, and just hearing their voices in my head was like night and day. Like compared to the first game, the characters were very ill-defined. By the last ones, by the last few, I could just hear them in my head. So that is just being involved in that process is just like, it's like magic when you just hear it for the first time and it just sounds right. There's just no feeling in the world. And in a way, it's a little scary because it's now out of your control. It's now in the control of somebody else, and you have to trust them. And it's my favorite part of the process. The working with the voice actors is my favorite part of the whole process. I don't know if that answered the question, but
it's okay.
I just like working.
No, it lets us get out of the house, which is nice as well.
Yes.
Not anymore. It doesn't.
Not anymore.
Not anymore. No.
I think it comes down to the question again about where you are in the process and how much you're allowed to be involved in the process. Sometimes it's really is last minute. We're casting tomorrow. We've sent them a picture. Is there anything else you want to send? It's like, yeah, a bio. Explaining that a bio is often best short, so that you've got a few words that sum up the character in a paragraph, and then everything else after that is useful. But if you can't sum up the character in those few words, you haven't got a character, you've got a mess. You've got someone coming in to play a character, not an encyclopedia. I think valuing the different skills. I mean, I've worked with stunt professionals, and if you're asking somebody to stand up after being injured, even if they're there as an advisor, if they are negotiating a difficult corridor, having a stunt advisor there, because their body is their skill base and they know how to do these things. And the difference between a stunt coordinator knowing how to stand up from a situation, even than an actor in many cases, so that they can come in and go, here's my skill base, and polish and improve things. So it's casting with skills. On a flip side, because I'll say this about actors, understand you're coming into a different medium. So yes, bring your skills from theatre, but it's not theatre, darling. And if you are saying this would work in the theatre, and the director on the other side is saying, yes, but we really need to make sure that the player understands we are crossing this under fire, then you're going to have to run with that direction, because that really nice quiet delivery might sell the emotional moment, but not with the mortars going off and the player who's picked up with a 4-day game break in between playing things to then come back to understand what they need to do. So sometimes you do need to hit things harder than you would in the theatre, because you're giving players gameplay information, possibly a month after they last played it, to bring them up to speed to play the game. And if you are standing in the way of the interactivity, you are standing in the way of the experience. And that can be the case with the dialogue sometimes. You have to write dialogue that's not how you prefer. Think about how difficult it is to convey exposition in a film when you have the soundtrack laid out, all of the props laid out, and you are writing that for an environment where the props aren't finished, you don't know what the person is doing, and you've got to explain not only the narrative exposition, but the gameplay exposition of cross here and get the machine gun. And that has to come with the emotion. So the dialogue has a different format in games, in some types of games, because there's no such thing as a game, but in some types of formats of game, it's learning the fact that just as when you're doing a radio recording, you need to be able to convey you are holding the pistol in your left hand without saying, I'm holding the pistol in my left hand and it's loaded. There are different writing conventions, but also performance conventions that come with it. So occasionally, asking why the player needs to know this, rather than, so bring your skill base, but also bring an open heart and an open mind, and work together. I love working with actors. I want to do more.
We love you as well, Andy.
No, that's cool. That's what you did there, was you answered Craig's question. So we did technically get some QA time in. Unfortunately, being the first panel of the event, we have to stick to the clock. Otherwise, we will pass on our sins to future panels.
Anyone who's worked with voice actors has like 100 stories. Like that could be like 2 hours just by itself.
Yeah. So
we're talking like, oh my God, I have an anecdote. Like, no, we're on the clock.
So we're going to pretend that was an answer to Craig's question in the Q&A, and we're good. I think I now am going to pass it back to Ed. Thank you so much, everyone, and let's have a virtual applause for our excellent panelists. Thank you. And yeah, we're gonna give up the floor to everyone else.